If you were on social media at all last week, there's a good chance you likely saw this graphic. Now, if you didn't, I'm going to break it down here for you today, but needless to say, it looks like there's been a drastic fall in revenue year over year from 2022 to 2023 on Airbnb. What's up, guys? My name is McKeown. I'm a licensed real estate agent and investor in the Dallas-Fort Worth market of Texas, as well as the Orlando, Florida market. Now, what we're going to talk about today, and I've actually made a video probably a year or two ago, is whether or not Airbnb is on its way down. Now, first and foremost, if you are coming across this video, I do own technically a handful of long-term rentals, a couple short-term rentals, and I've built multiple houses myself. So I have a little bit of history behind short-term, long-term, and even technically mid-term rentals. But with that all being said, we're going to discuss a tweet that came out last week, basically showcasing that there were certain counties, and a lot of different counties throughout the entire US, that saw anywhere from north of 50% to close to about 40% decline in revenue from May of 2022 to May of 2023. Now, what I'm not going to do is run through a bunch of different articles, a bunch of different statistics and analytics in terms of, hey, I'm right, you're wrong. But what I am going to be doing is showing you why Airbnb certainly is seeing a decline in year over year revenue. I don't know necessarily if I would agree with 50 to 55% in certain counties, but needless to say, I'm not surprised that Airbnb's revenue is falling. So let's jump into probably the most obvious reason Airbnb has seen a substantial downfall in revenue, not just from 2022 to 2023, but probably the peak in 2020 is because of the fact that we had a massive amount of restrictions. Travel restrictions specifically limited people to having to now drive to where they wanted to take a destinational vacation, or if they weren't going to drive, they were going to fly, but there were certainly restrictions when it came to flying. Now, a lot of the competition that comes with Airbnb is hotels. Now, as we know, depending on the city and state, a lot of those hotels were no longer operational. Now, if they weren't operational, what options do you have? Well, you've got Airbnb. Also, with the 2020 and 2021 travel restrictions, people were doing a lot less lavish and crazy vacations overseas because, again, travel restrictions limited the ability to travel to other countries. Even Canada, specifically just north of us, you were severely limited in the travel outside of the United States. So what options, again, did you only have? You had options to travel within the United States, more than likely driving to wherever you had to go. And if you were a large family or a large party, you more than likely were renting an Airbnb. So yes, the Airbnb revenue that was generated in 2020 and 2021 is definitely going to be inflated compared to your 2022 numbers, especially compared to your 2023. So why are we seeing such a decline in 2023 compared to 2022? And we're not even looking at 2021 or 2020. Now, one of the big reasons there, I believe, is people are purchasing Airbnbs, or they're being a little bit creative with the house that they live in, giving an opportunity to turn it into an Airbnb, even though it technically shouldn't really be an Airbnb. Now, this obviously increases the amount of Airbnbs, which then increases the amount of competition. If you increase the amount of competition and there's not a lot more demand, it's going to lower the total cost of that individual Airbnb or something similar in its given market. Now, what I can tell you is obviously destinational Airbnbs are going to be your best option. The reason being is hopefully there's not too much saturation in that market. You're not going to have someone that lives in a house and turns it into an Airbnb and moves down the road. More than likely, it's an investor that lives in a completely different state and owns that property outright as a investment property. So destinational opportunities for Airbnbs, I think, are still a very valid option as far as investing in real estate. What I wouldn't do, though, is look at a home in downtown Dallas where people aren't really going as a destinational location, purchasing it with the intent to use it as a short-term rental. What I would do is purchase a short-term rental in maybe a luxury, high-end, destinational market that is going to get you much better occupancy with a lot less saturation. Now, what I'm going to do here for you guys is give you a really good example of another similar platform to Airbnb that actually saw the very same thing happen for them, and it's the reason why I got off of that platform. And if you're familiar with that platform, it's called Turo, or if you even go back far enough, they used to be called Relay Rides. Now, I spoke about Turo on my channel before. I've actually explained the pros and cons of it. Now, it's been a few years, and technically, I've not been a host or someone that has rented my car out on Turo, but as a consumer, I use it almost every single time I go on vacation. Now, the issue here and the relatability to Airbnb is I actually got off of the platform. I no longer rented a couple of the cars that I had on Turo. I took them off, and the main reasons why were because the company itself, I felt like, was kind of trending towards the consumer rather than the host itself. And I can see a lot of similarities there when it comes to Airbnb. Another example was I had a situation where I had to cancel a reservation on Airbnb. And because I had one cancellation over the course of a year, I no longer was able to hit superhost status. Now, if you're familiar with Airbnb, superhost status puts you well above and beyond any of the other individuals renting out their units. So it was an entire year. Granted, it was just a small short-term rental, but it was an entire year I was no longer able to hit that superhost status, which obviously affected me financially. Now, on top of the fact that Turo was kind of trending towards the consumer rather than the host as well, it kind of made Turo a little bit more, I guess, mainstream, meaning that people were finding out that, hey, I've got one car, but if I buy another car, I can kind of alternate between the two when one's rented and the other's not, drive one and rent out the other, and it essentially pays for both of my cars. Now, I certainly wasn't the only individual with this idea. There was also other individuals that took it even to the extreme to where, they went off and purchased and financed 10, 15, 20, 50, 100 cars and actually created an entire business on Turo. Now, I was fortunate enough to only have a couple cars on Turo, one that finished up a lease that I was able to turn back in. But truly, when I made my exit out of Turo, there was just too many people deciding to just rent any car they physically could, which that created more competition, and not enough people actually wanting to rent cars, depending on the given market you're in. It started to really not make any more sense for me to continue to rent out cars on Turo. Which, going back to Airbnb, a lot of different markets, especially these markets that you saw on the article, could certainly be dealing with the very same thing. A lot of people just deciding to turn their house into an Airbnb and potentially purchase another house because maybe in 2021, they got a terrific interest rate, but now they've got an Airbnb that's technically not even renting that much because there's too many Airbnbs in this specific county or specific state or area, because again, it's not a destinational location where you're getting a ton of influx of people coming for vacation, which could be a big reason why you're seeing a fall off of revenue. Also, another side comment here too, if you watch a lot of TikToks, a lot of people use Airbnb Arbitrage, which is essentially you reach out to someone who maybe has a good opportunity for a short-term rental, but they're not using it as a short-term rental. Maybe they're using it as a long-term rental. Well, you go sign a lease for a year, and then you yourself become the landlord for the short-term rental, and you start renting it out short-term. So no longer do you have to put 20% down and buy it as an investment property. You just got to pay the landlord monthly and make sure that he's okay with you short-term renting it, or just hope that you never get caught. Now, with the influx of a lot of young people thinking that this is just a free and easy route to success and wealth, obviously this is going to increase the amount of Airbnbs, which further makes it far more saturated and causes people to compete against one another, which again will drive down prices. And last but not least, you may be seeing it in your local market here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Initially, we saw it in the city of Arlington, and now we actually are going to, effective December 2023, see it in all of Dallas. Now, you may be asking what that may be, and it's city restrictions. Now, utilizing my market as just an example, the city of Arlington has a ton to do. We've got Six Flags, we've got AT&T Stadium, which is where the Dallas Cowboys play, as well as a Texas Rangers Stadium, and a bunch of other things that people are kind of coming into town or driving to have a fun night out or a fun weekend. Now, initially what happened with the city of Arlington is they banned short-term rentals entirely unless you were a certain radius around kind of all the entertainment district. Now, that was really, to my knowledge, the only city that had a significant ban on short-term rentals. And if you're familiar with the Dallas-Fort Worth market, we are a huge metro. So we basically had free reins to buy anything you wanted and make it a short-term rental. Well, effectively, just a few weeks back, the city of Dallas has now banned short-term rentals effective at the end of 2023. Now, what is this going to do? It's obviously going to push a lot of investors out that currently have short-term rentals and no longer going to have those apply by the end of the year. Now, on the flip side, it's actually going to help individuals that do have short-term rentals that fall into the place that, whether it be the city of Arlington or the city of Dallas, actually allows short-term rentals. Now, I'm a great example here where I technically have an Airbnb in the city limits of Dallas that will continue to be an Airbnb and actually be allowed in the city of Dallas. And the reason being is, yes, the city of Dallas did ban short-term rentals. However, if you are in a zoning that is multifamily, which is where I reside, you technically can continue to rent out your short-term rental as exactly that. Now, the plus side for me is obviously that means a lot of the other Airbnbs that are not zoned multifamily are going to be pushed out, causing less Airbnbs to be on the market. And that's actually going to work opposite of kind of what happened with Turo with me, where now technically there's going to be less competition, and less competition means I could probably raise my prices because there's less options out there. Now, this is certainly something I'm going to continue to deal with in my metro, not just in the city of Arlington and the city of Dallas, but Universal Studios is coming to Frisco, Texas, which is on the north side of the metro in a very, very good city. But I can see a ton of people wanting an Airbnb near Universal Studios, but I can also see the city of Frisco down the road certainly not likening the idea of their city turning into a big rental haven. Now, if you ask my mom about renting a random stranger's house, it's totally foreign to her. But Airbnb, just like Turo, is certainly becoming more and more mainstream. Now, with it becoming more and more mainstream, you're getting those investors that are coming out of the woodworks trying to attempt Airbnb arbitrage, which is honestly just causing way too much saturation. I would love to just never see Airbnb arbitrage happen or be okay whatsoever, but that's a whole nother conversation in itself. But needless to say, Airbnb is certainly going to see a decline in revenue, especially when you've got other components such as VRBO and other rental websites that are now also causing competition. There's going to be other websites that pop up that people are going to trend over to rather than Airbnb. So does this graphic mean that Airbnb is headed to its downfall? Well, the good news is I don't own any short-term rentals in any of these markets, so that's the plus side for me. You may, however, on the other hand, own a short-term rental in one of these markets and may not even be experiencing any of the downfall that this graphic shows. Now, on the flip side, there was someone that combated it that showed Airbnb, rather than an average of 40% decline, showed more of about 3 to 5% in annual revenue decline. Now, it's certainly something that I agree with to an extent. I definitely agree that Airbnb, especially compared to the years of 2020 and 2021, is definitely seeing a decline in revenue. But I don't think we're seeing a 40 to 50% decline. Now, it'll certainly be interesting to see what happens with Airbnb in the long haul, as well as short-term rentals across the country. I did just start my short-term rental up in Broken Bow, Oklahoma, just about a month ago. But if I have any basis based off of how that is renting, I would say that my short-term rental up there is going to be just fine. Thanks again for watching, guys. Make sure to like and subscribe, and stay tuned for the next video.